It's been a good while since the last fully new Devil May Cry game, and Devil May Cry 5 reminds you why the wait has felt so long. The level of depth present in DMC5 provides so much to practice with and perfect. There are times when the combat is the best it's ever been, which is a pretty bold statement considering the standard set by both DMC3 and 4. In that sense, the game is definitely a grand return, one that is as loud and stylish as you would hope.
Somebody call a doctor?
Spreading a 20-mission story across 3 playable characters is an ambitious, if somewhat worrying, proposition. Worrying because it's difficult to have each character be as mechanically interesting and narratively relevant as the others, problems the series has explicitly run into before. Devil May Cry 5, though, actually has the focus to make it work. The 3 characters are not only genuinely fascinating to use in their own ways, but ultimately feel vital to what's going on within the story. Players start the game as Nero, introduced in DMC4, and who makes perfect sense to kick things off here. Nero is a fantastic mixture of old and new. The ability to zip toward enemies and bring them to you returns, as does the Exceed system, allowing you to power up sword swings in a way that is especially rewarding to those who correctly time the charge right after an attack. These elements, just on their own, create remarkably fluid and flashy fights. Devil Breakers, Nero's big new addition, complement the rest of his arsenal in a way that feels carefully thought out. These Devil Breakers are small mechanical arms. Each has a different property and therefore a different focus in combat. The Overture shoots out a burst of electricity, great for dealing solid damage either on its own or at the end of a combo. Gerbera, another Devil Breaker, can also do damage, but is most notable for an exceptionally useful dodge, quickly and gracefully blasting you through the air. The downside of every Devil Breaker is that if you're hit while activating them, they break, and you suddenly lose access to whatever advantages they provide. You can only bring in a fixed number of Devil Breakers into a mission, and once they're gone, that's it, unless you manage to pick up others off the ground along the way. Even if you do pick up a Devil Breaker, though, it's not like you can save it for later. It immediately equips, and now that's suddenly what you're using, unable to switch freely between them. Devil Breakers can also be used to escape damage in a pinch or be charged up for extra powerful attacks. Both uses destroy the breaker completely. Such severe limitations give an immediately appreciable layer of strategy, forcing players to think about each breaker and how to use them most effectively. It blends well with the combat system that already rewards utilizing a wide variety of attacks. Making Devil Breakers fragile adds to the tension and excitement when you get a new one. Exciting in the sense that you don't yet know all it can do, and tense because you already know how quickly it can go away.
This is where we part ways.
You're gonna miss all the fun.
There's enough going on with Nero that he could probably support the entire game on his own, but he shares the spotlight with 2 others who are vastly different. The most surprising of these characters is V, which makes sense considering he's the most mysterious within the story. V uses 3 demons, with the primary 2 being the panther-like Shadow and the electricity-spewing bird Griffin. The 2 are mapped to separate buttons and need to be operated simultaneously to really be effective. Meanwhile, a giant golem named Nightmare can be called in to assault the enemy independently if V has enough of his devil trigger gauge full. V himself is mostly worthless in combat, but he needs to deal the finishing blow to enemies since his demon pets can't do it themselves. Take too long while enemies are in a vulnerable state, and they'll spring back to life, ready to attack once more. At first, it's a lot to process as you manage Shadow and Griffin at the same time, all while keeping V out of harm's way. Part of the reason it can feel so foreign is because of how V's method emphasizes positioning. His style injects new ideas without betraying what makes the series great, since you still need to have combos consisting of varied attacks, but in a way that requires you to be aware of many elements all at once. After you do get it pinned down, though, V's fights end up ultimately feeling the easiest of the 3. Encounters and boss fights can be overcome just by grasping the most basic concepts, which is true of the other characters as well, but the bar feels even lower here. With that said, V has a wide assortment of available moves and can learn quite a few new ones, so those who want to master V have to put in considerable work. He is always enjoyable, even if his missions aren't the most difficult. Alternating between characters throughout the story also goes a long way in keeping all 3 of them appealing. No one is more appealing than Dante, which feels appropriate considering he's the one who started it all. Like in DMC4, Dante can switch between 4 different styles at any point in combat. The Trickster style focuses on evasion. Swordmaster is centered around melee attacks. Gunslinger prioritizes ranged weapons, and Royal Guard emphasizes defense. Dante can also swap between melee and ranged weapons on the fly. Doing well in combat means regularly, if not constantly, bouncing between weapons and styles, necessitating a good deal of dexterity. Much like with V, it can be a lot to handle, yet you don't need to have true mastery to enjoy it. Just dashing toward an enemy, knocking it into the air, and then clobbering it with different weapons makes you feel like a minor god. The sensation is both a result of how it looks and the inherent satisfaction of knowing that you thoughtfully sequenced button presses in the right way. It's a very similar sense of satisfaction compared to past games, but what really elevates it in 5 is how outlandish Dante's various weapons get. And they really are more bizarre than ever.
Devil may cry.
Of course, it wouldn't matter how interesting the characters are if the enemies and bosses didn't force you to apply those concepts in creative ways, and they absolutely do. Enemies get increasingly more difficult, and the combination of enemies increasingly devious. They start as little more than punching bags, but then slowly evolve, having unique mixtures of defensive and offensive capabilities that can be countered without those counters being too obvious. The bosses themselves always feel mighty in one way or another, whether it's their sheer size or the ferocity of their attacks. Bosses also feel flexible enough that a variety of approaches can be equally effective, depending on the player. For a game that seems to cherish intensity and depth, the way it handles death feels out of character. Upon dying, you're given the options of spending some red orb currency to continue, giving up and restarting the mission, or using a special item called a gold orb to revive. Having different options isn't a bad idea, but it's so easy to come by gold orbs that they don't feel nearly as valuable as they have in past games, and it takes much of the sting out of death. You get a gold orb daily as a login bonus, and they're not hard to find just sitting out in the world. Gold orbs can also be earned by participating in linked fights. During certain missions throughout the story, a random online player will participate alongside you as another character. If you think they perform well, you can give them a thumbs up, and they can do the same for you. The approval translates into a gold orb, and it's simple to rack up a handful without really doing anything out of the ordinary. While it's novel playing Devil May Cry with another player, the game never demands careful cooperation, so it's something that just sort of happens, and it's neither particularly good nor bad. Since there are no health recovery orbs in DMC5, perhaps Capcom wanted to compensate with gold orbs, but it feels like an overextension. The normal Devil Hunter difficulty, which is the highest available difficulty before completing the game, doesn't push hard enough to make their abundance seem warranted, especially if you've played Devil May Cry before. It should be noted that reviving does negatively affect the ranking you get at the end of the mission. Going for a high rank is one of the most enjoyable and addicting parts of any Devil May Cry, so it does help mitigate the problem somewhat. The Son of Sparta difficulty, unlocked after finishing on normal, is tough in a way that goes beyond numbers. Harder enemies that would be encountered later on take the place of weaker enemies at the start, making missions feel different immediately. Like Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, DMC5 has a store that allows players to spend real money to buy things like red orbs. Unfortunately, at the time of review, the store isn't available, so we're unable to see exactly what's on offer and how much it costs.
You know I got you covered, asshole.
For a game that puts so much into fighting and the systems that govern that fighting, Devil May Cry 5 gets a surprising amount right with its story, but it doesn't manage to nail everything. Although Devil May Cry 4 struggled to give both Dante and Nero sections equal and consistent weight, DMC5 does a much better job with its primary cast of 3. Their stories blend together in a way that ends up being very intimate and more filled with emotion than one might expect. Capcom has really drilled down the most exciting parts of a Devil May Cry story, telling perhaps the most focused one yet. With that said, the conclusion is a little flimsy, with some late-game revelations not getting enough development to sink in as deeply as they could. The environments toward the end are also too similar to one another, and although it makes sense within the narrative, just a bit more visual variety in the second half would have gone a long way. A couple of returning characters feel like they're involved simply for the sake of it, doing very little throughout the entire story. At least Nico, a brand new character and the creator of the Devil Breakers, is a blast. She may not be quite as invested as the playable characters, but she has some of the most endearing scenes throughout the whole game, even if they are lighthearted.
Do you have any idea where that's been?
Up your butt?
Devil May Cry 5 has a lot going on in almost every possible way. Some ideas, such as gold orbs and linked missions, feel undercooked, yet it's hard to describe the fighting as anything other than spectacular. The number of options within any single battle is nothing short of ridiculous. If most games are defined by having a bunch of ideas and then trimming them down to the best ones, it's almost as if DMC5 couldn't say no when it came to weapons or abilities, while also taking the time to give each a strong purpose. Beyond the mechanics, what lingers even longer is that some of the encounters, especially toward the end, are exciting because you'll care about the events that led to them. Devil May Cry 5 has been a long time coming, but it feels like hitting the jackpot.
Alright, time to kick some ass.
Easy Allies reviews are made possible by generous viewers just like you. If you like what you see, check out patreon.com/easyallies to help us make more. For just $1 a month, you can gain access to weekly updates, spoiler discussions, and exclusive shows.